Black billionaire told to leave, so he shuts the company down. The early morning sun gleamed against the skyline of downtown San Francisco, casting long shadows across the polished marble entrance of the illustrious Grand Lumina Hotel. Elliot Brooks stepped out of the back seat of his black Range Rover, the driver respectfully holding the door for him. Elliot straightened his jacket, a deep charcoal Tom Ford masterpiece that fit his 6'2" frame like it had been sewn directly onto him. His polished Oxfords tapped softly against the stone walkway as he approached the entrance, briefcase in hand, shoulders set with the quiet authority of a man who had built empires from nothing. The valet, a young man barely older than 20, spotted Elliot immediately and looked away. Pretending to check his phone, he shifted his attention to a silver BMW that pulled up behind the Range Rover, hastily moving to greet the white driver with a practiced smile. Elliot paused for half a second. Then he simply pocketed his car keys, walked around the idle valet without a word, and headed for the glass doors himself. A chill ran under his skin, not from the morning breeze but from the cold familiarity of the moment. No matter how many years passed, no matter how many billions were under his name, some things hadn't changed. Inside, the lobby buzzed quietly with the start of another high-profile day. Bellhops moved briskly, businessmen and women clustered in small groups around coffee carts, early conversations muffled by marble and glass. At the front desk, a slim woman with a stiff bun tapped busily at her keyboard. She glanced up at Elliot, offered a tight, automatic smile that didn't reach her eyes, and then looked back down as if dismissing him. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked without lifting her head again. "I'm here for the West Coast Venture Summit," Elliot said, voice steady. Novatech Dynamics reserved the grand ballroom and multiple floors for the event. She blinked up at him, briefly scanning his face, her expression slipping from politeness to skepticism. "Are you here to deliver something?" she asked. "We're expecting catering and AV teams this morning." "No," Elliot said, still calm. "I'm Elliot Brooks. I'm the CEO of Novatech Dynamics, and I'm the keynote speaker for the summit." A beat of silence. She hesitated, her fingers pausing above the keyboard. "Right," she said, voice clipped. "Would you mind waiting outside for a moment? We're still finalizing preparations. Someone will come get you." Elliot's jaw tightened, but his face betrayed nothing. He noticed, out of the corner of his eye, another man entering. A white man in a sharp gray suit, carrying nothing but a tablet under his arm. Before he could even reach the front desk, a smiling hotel manager swept toward him, hand outstretched, ushering him into the conference area with laughter and easy conversation. The front desk woman didn't look at Elliot again. She simply gestured faintly toward the lobby doors. Elliot glanced down at his Rolex. It was 7:57 a.m. His opening remarks were scheduled for 9:01. He had time. What he didn't have anymore was patience for spaces that claimed luxury, but still trafficked in small, cutting humiliations. Still, without a word, he turned and walked back outside. The sidewalk bustled with morning energy. Delivery trucks idled along the curb. Early commuters hurried past, clutching coffees and briefcases. Life moved on. Elliot leaned casually against a polished black railing, pulling out his phone as if he had simply chosen to make a call in the fresh air. The line connected on the first ring. "Boss," Marcus Tate's familiar voice came through. "Just checking. You made it in." "Not exactly," Elliot said evenly. A pause. "Not exactly?" "They asked me to wait outside." Silence stretched for a beat too long. "Want me to come down?" Marcus asked, voice low and dangerous now. "No," Elliot said. "Stay with the team. The partners are landing in 20. Make sure they're taken care of." Marcus exhaled hard but didn't argue. "Copy that." Elliot hung up and slid the phone back into his pocket. He crossed his arms loosely over his chest, his mind moving fast. Not with anger. Not anymore. Anger would have been easy, satisfying even, but it wouldn't have changed a thing. He wasn't 19 anymore, fresh out of college, and still believing that degrees and eloquence and hard work would insulate him. He was Elliot Brooks now, founder, billionaire, game changer. And if this hotel couldn't see that, if they still couldn't see a black man in a tailored suit without suspicion, then maybe they didn't deserve to be part of his world. At exactly 8:03, Elliot walked back inside. The same woman was still at the desk, typing something into the computer with forced efficiency. She glanced up, saw him, and visibly stiffened. "I thought I asked you to wait outside, sir," she said, tapping at her keyboard as if it was a shield. "I waited," Elliot said calmly. "Now I'd like to speak with the event coordinator, Gina Monroe." "I'm Elliot Brooks, CEO. The reason half this hotel is booked solid today." Another hesitation. A crack in her armor. She reached for the phone, murmuring something into the receiver. While he waited, Elliot scanned the lobby again. More people were arriving now. Early guests in tailored clothes, portfolios tucked under their arms. A few of them, older men in expensive suits, were greeted warmly by uniformed staff and ushered inside without a second glance. It was not lost on him. The young man with the walkie-talkie from earlier reappeared. He stood behind the front desk woman, studying Elliot with a furrowed brow. Then, too loudly, he asked, "Security?" "No," Elliot said, smiling faintly. "Owner." The young man flushed crimson and dropped his gaze. Before anyone could stumble through another insult, a woman in a navy blazer rushed into the lobby, folder clutched in her hands. "Mr. Brooks, I am so sorry," she said breathlessly. "We weren't told you'd arrived." "Please, please, right this way." She didn't wait for the front desk clerk or the walkie-talkie boy. She didn't check a screen or ask another question. She simply led Elliot across the marble floors toward the conference center. Behind him, the woman at the desk watched, face drained of color. And Elliot knew, without a doubt, that she understood now. But it didn't matter. Because he wasn't walking in there to prove anything. He was walking in because he belonged there from the beginning. Inside the grand ballroom, preparations were in full swing. Tables were draped in pristine white linens. Rows of chairs faced a gleaming stage set with the Novatech Dynamics logo. Screens flickered softly, running through final tech checks. Staff bustled everywhere, caterers adjusting silver trays, AV crews testing sound systems, event planners triple-checking seating charts. No one here questioned who he was. Not yet. Gina led him to a private lounge just off the ballroom. "I'll have coffee brought in immediately," she said, flustered. "Is there anything else you need, Mr. Brooks?" He shook his head. "Just a moment." She nodded and retreated, leaving him alone. Elliot set his briefcase down and slowly exhaled. He wasn't angry, not really. He was done. Done letting spaces like this think they were doing him a favor by letting him through the door. Done making himself smaller to accommodate their discomfort. He pulled out his phone again. This time he didn't call Marcus. He called Tamara King, his chief of operations. "Tammy," he said, voice steady. "Boss? We're moving the summit." There was no hesitation, no doubt, just a soft, determined intake of breath. "Where to?" "The Meridian," Elliot said. "Tell them to ready the crystal atrium. Have Marcus start redirecting our people." Quietly. No drama. Tammy was already typing as she spoke. "Understood." "I'll coordinate. Anything else?" "Yeah." Elliot looked around the immaculate but meaningless lounge. "Cancel the rest of the booking, too. Suites, conference rooms, catering, everything. Effective immediately." She didn't miss a beat. "On it." Elliot ended the call, tucked the phone back into his jacket, and adjusted his cuffs again. The Grand Lumina Hotel didn't deserve Novatech dynamics, and they were about to find out what it meant to underestimate the wrong man. Not through lawsuits, not through rage, not through viral videos. Through disappearance. Through the kind of silence that echoes 1,000 times louder than shouting ever could. And Elliot Brooks was a master of silence. He opened the door to the lounge, smoothed his suit jacket, and walked back into the ballroom without a backward glance. The storm was already coming, and this time, it wasn't going to make a sound. C. The Meridian Hotel sat only 6 blocks away, but it might as well have been another universe. While the Grand Lumina exuded a cold, detached arrogance built on marble and old money, the Meridian buzzed with a different kind of energy, sleek, dynamic, welcoming. It was a place where real innovation happened behind glass walls and open spaces, where no one needed to flash credentials to be taken seriously. Elliot's SUV pulled up to the entrance. Before the wheels even stopped, a valet was opening his door with a crisp nod of respect, no hesitation, no second guessing. Inside, a conference manager named Jordan already stood waiting with a full team behind him, tablets in hand, lanyards ready. "Mr. Brooks, we're honored to have you," Jordan said, voice steady with real enthusiasm. "Your team's call came through 20 minutes ago. We've already cleared the Crystal Atrium for your event. AV is transferring now, and we have a dedicated setup crew to assist." Elliot nodded once, feeling the tension ease slightly across his shoulders. "Thank you for being fast." Jordan smiled. "You don't get to be the best without being ready for the unexpected." Elliot allowed a small smile to break across his face for the first time that day. Professionalism, competence, respect. It wasn't complicated. It never had been. Inside, the Crystal Atrium gleamed with soft, natural light spilling through towering glass panels. The space was even better than the grand ballroom had been. Higher ceilings, better acoustics, a central stage with panoramic visibility. Investors were already arriving, filtering in with curious glances, their steps quickening when they spotted familiar Novatech banners being set up. Tammy approached, her phone still pressed to her ear as she coordinated last-minute details. "We're ahead of schedule," she said, flashing him a thumbs up. 70% of the guests have already been rerouted. Marcus is outside coordinating rides for the rest. Catering setting up in the adjacent garden room. "Good," Elliot said, surveying the room like a general before a battle. Then he spotted them, 3 senior partners from Redding Capital, standing near the back, deep in conversation. David Langston, CFO of one of their largest investment groups, was among them. A kingmaker in Silicon Valley circles. If there was anyone he needed on board for what he was about to do, it was Langston. Elliot walked toward them with measured steps. They noticed him instantly, pausing mid-conversation. "Elliot," Langston said, extending a hand. "Heard there was a last-minute change." "Everything all right?" Elliot shook his hand firmly. "It will be," he said simply. The other partners nodded, waiting for more. "I owe everyone a full explanation," Elliot said, glancing toward the gathering crowd. "Give me 10 minutes. I'll explain it to the room." Langston tilted his head, studying Elliot with sharp eyes. "We're listening." Across the atrium, the final AV connections were snapping into place. Microphones tested, projectors aligned. Marcus caught Elliot's eye from across the space and gave a small nod. They were ready. Elliot stepped onto the low stage, pulling no attention to himself, until he spoke. "Good morning," he said, voice calm but carrying easily across the atrium. Conversation stopped, heads turned. A few latecomers hurried to find seats. "I want to thank you all for your flexibility today," Elliot continued, surveying the room. "I know a venue change an hour before a major summit is disruptive. It wasn't planned, but it was necessary. He paused, letting the weight of those last words settle. This morning, at the Grand Lumina Hotel, I was asked to wait outside. Murmurs rippled through the room. Not because there was a security concern, not because of a logistics issue, simply because when I arrived, wearing this suit, carrying this briefcase, I didn't look like the CEO they were expecting. The murmurs turned to hard-edged silence. No one asked my name. No one checked a list. They assumed, and they dismissed. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats, the ugliness of the situation hitting them fully now. I don't believe in creating scenes. I don't believe in shouting matches or viral moments designed to humiliate. But I also don't believe in rewarding disrespect. He took a breath. So we moved. Simple, surgical, unapologetic. In the hours ahead, we're going to discuss innovation, disruption, the future of technology. But let's be clear, none of that matters if we still cling to outdated ideas about who belongs in the room. The investors listened, rapt now. No one checked their phones. No one whispered. I didn't walk away this morning because my ego was bruised. I walked away because leadership isn't just about closing deals or raising capital. It's about setting a standard for the spaces we build and refusing to compromise that standard for convenience. He paused again, then added quietly, If you're uncomfortable with that, I understand. You're free to leave. No one moved. Not a single person. Langston leaned forward slightly in his seat, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Elliot smiled faintly. Good, he said. Because those who stay, those who build with us, are going to be part of something that doesn't just change markets, it changes mindsets. He stepped down from the stage. The room erupted in applause. Not polite applause, not obligatory applause, real applause, the kind that started small, then spread like a spark across dry leaves, until it filled the entire atrium with energy. As Elliot made his way through the crowd, people rose from their seats to greet him. Investors he had known for years, new faces looking for a way into his orbit, young founders clapping with unhidden admiration. Tammy was waiting by the side wall, her eyes shining with something between pride and fierce loyalty. You didn't just move the summit, she said as he reached her. You moved the bar. Elliot gave a quiet, satisfied nod. And the day was only getting started. The day unfolded like a carefully placed row of dominoes, each decision pushing the next into motion. By noon, the Meridian's lobby pulsed with the buzz of conversation, clinking coffee cups, and fast-moving deals. Elliot stood near the side of the atrium, away from the crowd, scanning the room. Tammy approached with a purposeful stride, her tablet in one hand, phone in the other. She didn't need to speak for Elliot to know she was carrying news. It was written in the tightness around her mouth. They're calling, she said, voice low. Who? Elliot asked, though he already had a good idea. The Grand Lumina, she said. Manager, assistant manager, director of sales. All of them. Elliot didn't flinch. Ignore them. Tammy hesitated. They're offering to comp everything. Suites, venue, even refund the deposit. Elliot smiled without warmth. A refund doesn't change character. He turned slightly, watching as Jalen helped set up a second networking session by the bar. Across the room, Marcus was handing out new event programs printed within the hour. Everything moved with smooth, professional precision. They're panicking, Tammy said. Let them, Elliot replied. Then his phone buzzed in his pocket. Unknown number. He considered ignoring it, but something inside him said otherwise. He answered. Mr. Brooks, a crisp voice came through. This is Richard Langley, General Manager of the Grand Lumina. I want to personally extend our deepest apologies. Elliot didn't raise his voice. He didn't even interrupt. He simply waited. Richard faltered slightly, the dead air on the line throwing him off balance. We realized there were some misunderstandings this morning, Richard continued, his words careful, manicured. Please allow us to make amends. We value your business deeply. Elliot finally spoke. No, Mr. Langley, you valued my money, my business. You had no regard for the man behind it. A long silence. I'm sure you understand, Mr. Brooks, Langley tried. Our staff were following standard protocols. Protocols, Elliot repeated, his voice like a blade sheathed in velvet. Tell me, was it protocol to assume I was a driver? To instruct me to wait outside twice without ever asking my name? Was it protocol to greet every other guest, every white guest, with handshakes and smiles? Langley stammered. Of course not. You don't need to explain, Elliot cut in. You've already explained yourselves with your actions. Another pause. If there's anything we can offer, there is, Elliot said. A lesson. Langley waited. You don't get a second chance to recognize respect when it stands right in front of you. With that, Elliot ended the call. He tucked the phone back into his pocket, exhaling slowly, grounding himself. He would not allow anger to be the final note of this day. That would be too easy. Too predictable. Instead, he had something far bigger in mind. Later that afternoon, as sessions moved into breakout groups, Elliot gathered Tammy, Jalen, Marcus, and his legal counsel, Ava Collins, into one of the side rooms. It was time to pull the second phase into motion. This morning changed things, Elliot began, leaning against the edge of the long table. Not just for today. For the entire future of Novatech. Tammy, always perceptive, narrowed her eyes slightly. You're not just talking about moving venues, are you? Elliot shook his head. No. I'm shutting down every contract we have with organizations like the Grand Lumina. Partnerships, vendors, services. Anyone who doesn't meet the standard, gone. Ava leaned forward, her legal pad already filling with notes. That's going to cause waves, Elliot. Some of these are long-standing agreements. Good, Elliot said. Let the waves come. Jalen whistled low under his breath. You're playing the long game. I'm building something cleaner, Elliot said. Stronger. Places where none of us, none of our partners, none of our clients have to wonder if they're welcome when they walk through the door. He let that settle for a moment. Start with the Lumina, he said to Ava. Terminate all business dealings effective immediately. No negotiation. Ava nodded briskly. I'll have the termination letters drafted by end of day. Elliot turned to Tammy. Update our vendor list. Send new guidelines to procurement. Every contract moving forward requires diversity audits, inclusion reviews, and behavior standards. Tammy grinned, fierce and proud. I'll get it out before midnight. Elliot turned last to Jalen and Marcus. And prepare a public statement. Marcus blinked. You're going public? Elliot's smile was razor sharp. Not with anger, with standards. We're not burning bridges. We're showing people what happens when you build your own. They nodded. And just like that, the summit transformed from a networking event into a revolution. By the end of the day, whispers about what had happened weren't whispers anymore. They were open conversations, respectful nods. Investors privately shook Elliot's hand, expressing support without needing to say too much. No viral videos, no outrage headlines. Just a fundamental shift, quiet but seismic. And it was just getting started. The next morning, headlines started circulating. Not because Elliot Brooks had spoken to the press, but because silence leaves a vacuum, and someone always rushes to fill it. The article on TechWire West was simple but devastating. Novatech abruptly pulls multi-million-dollar contracts following allegations of discrimination at downtown hotel. No lawsuits. No interviews. Just a matter-of-fact accounting of what had happened. A respected black billionaire CEO arriving for a major tech summit, asked to wait outside twice by hotel staff, and within hours, pulling not just his event, but his entire business from the hotel chain. It wasn't Elliot's name making noise. It was his actions. By noon, 3 other companies quietly canceled their upcoming events at the Grand Lumina. The cancellations weren't accompanied by statements. They didn't need to be. The message was clear. If Elliot Brooks said a place lacked integrity, that was enough. Back in Novatech's headquarters, Elliot stood in his glass-walled office, arms crossed, watching the downtown skyline. The coffee on his desk had long gone cold. Tammy knocked once, then stepped in. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "You need to see this," she said, handing over a slim tablet. Elliot glanced at the screen. It was an email from the CEO of the Grand Lumina Hotel Group. An apology, formal and polished. They were requesting a meeting, offering a public acknowledgement of their mistake, floating the idea of a diversity partnership with Novatech. Elliot handed the tablet back without a word. "You want me to respond?" Tammy asked. He shook his head. "Let them twist." He wasn't interested in their apologies, not now, not when they were motivated by fear of bad press, not a real change of heart. Across the office, Jalen poked his head in. "Boss," he said, "board's ready when you are." Elliot nodded and followed him down the hall. The boardroom was already humming with low conversation. At the head of the table sat Malcolm Vance, Novatech's chairman, a man who wore tailored suits like armor and spoke in clipped, calculated sentences. As Elliot entered, Malcolm looked up and gave a short nod. "We've been following the situation," Malcolm said as Elliot took his seat. "The question is, what's next?" Elliot leaned forward, fingers laced together on the table. "We finish what we started," he said simply. Malcolm arched an eyebrow. "You're talking about shutting down the external vendor network?" Elliot met his gaze without flinching. "I'm talking about cleaning house, top to bottom." A few board members exchanged glances. "And you're prepared for the backlash?" Malcolm asked. "This isn't just one hotel, Brooks. It's an entire supply chain. There will be blowback." Elliot's voice was even, steady. "I didn't build Novatech to fit into broken systems. I built it to be the system people could trust." He paused, letting the weight of that settle over the room. "If we don't hold our partners to the same standard we expect of ourselves, we're complicit." The room grew quiet. Thoughtful. No one interrupted. Finally, it was Ava, the head of legal, who spoke. "From a liability standpoint," she said, "it's solid. From a PR standpoint, it's gold." Elliot nodded. Malcolm folded his hands. "Then you have my full backing." One by one, the other board members voiced their agreement. Not because they were afraid of the optics, though that surely played a role, but because deep down they knew Elliot was right. It was bigger than this one incident. It was about the kind of company Novatech wanted to be remembered as. As the meeting adjourned, Jalen walked with Elliot back to his office. "You sure about this?" Jalen asked. Elliot smiled faintly. "I've never been more sure of anything." Hours later, a letter went out to all Novatech's vendors, contractors, and service providers. It wasn't hostile. It wasn't loud. It was clear. Effective immediately, Novatech would conduct a full audit of its partnerships, prioritizing equity, respect, and corporate ethics. Any organization failing to meet those standards would have their contracts terminated. There was no room for negotiation. Back at the Grand Lumina, the fallout hit like a slow-moving avalanche. Cancellations. Loss of high-profile clients. Rumors swirling among investors about reputational risk. Their stock took a hit before noon. Inside their ornate executive offices, the leadership scrambled, drafting statements, calling crisis PR firms, reaching out to high-profile clients to beg for reassurance. But none of it changed the simple truth. Respect, once lost, is rarely regained on demand. Meanwhile, Novatech was already moving forward. Tammy had secured a partnership with a Black-owned hospitality group for future events. Marcus had rewritten internal vendor protocols. Ava's legal team drafted new ethics clauses for all contracts. They weren't just responding to an incident. They were building something better. That evening, as dusk settled over the city, Elliot walked alone through the nearly empty floors of Novatech's tower. The usual hum of activity had quieted, employees gone home for the night, the glass walls reflecting the last bands of purple and gold light outside. In the lobby, the receptionist smiled warmly as he passed. She didn't need to ask who he was. Everyone here knew. At the elevator, Elliot paused, looking out at the city that had once tried to teach him where he belonged, and had failed. He wasn't leaving quietly. He was rewriting the map. And he was just getting started. 2 days later, the real tremors started. It wasn't just the Grand Lumina Hotel feeling the aftershocks anymore. Whispers moved through Silicon Valley faster than wildfire in a dry canyon. Other CEOs, some who looked like Elliot, most who didn't, started to quietly inquire about what had happened. Some reached out to him directly, cautious but curious. What did he see? What did they say? Was it really that bad? Elliot didn't give interviews. He didn't launch any public crusade. He didn't have to... Because by then, the damage wasn't coming from anything he said. It was coming from everything people were realizing. In a sleek, wood-paneled conference room at Blackstone Ventures, two executives sat in tense silence. "I don't think we can keep our event at the Lumina," one finally said, drumming his fingers against the table. "It'll look like we're endorsing what happened," the other agreed grimly. Within 24 hours, 4 major tech firms and 2 investment groups had pulled upcoming conferences and meetings from the Grand Lumina's venues nationwide. The Grand Lumina executives scrambled, issuing a limp public statement about retraining staff and enhancing inclusion policies. It was too late. The narrative wasn't about one hotel anymore. It was about what the tech industry tolerated, or didn't. Meanwhile, at Novatech, Elliot was 2 steps ahead. He called an emergency meeting with his senior leadership team and department heads. The conference room buzzed with low conversation when he entered, but it silenced instantly at his presence. He stood at the head of the long table, not with a folder full of spreadsheets or a PowerPoint queued up, but with nothing in his hands, nothing to shield him, just himself. "You know why we're here," Elliot said, voice calm, almost conversational. "And you know what it means." Some of the newer department heads shifted nervously, unsure. Elliot looked around the room, making eye contact with each of them. "I built Novatech from nothing, from a laptop and an idea in a 1-bedroom apartment with a leaky roof. I built it so nobody could ever tell me where I did or didn't belong." A few nods from the veterans in the room, people who remembered those early days. "But if we don't hold ourselves, and the companies we partner with, to a higher standard, then what have we really built?" Silence, heavy, loaded. "So here's what's happening," Elliot continued. "We are freezing all external vendor relationships pending a full ethical audit. Every contract, every venue, every supplier." Murmurs of shock rippled through the room. A hand shot up. Amelia Drake, head of finance, sharp and unafraid. Elliot, she said, choosing her words carefully. You realize this will slow down multiple initiatives. Product launches, expansion, even day-to-day operations. I know, Elliot said, nodding. And it's still the right move. Another hand, Samir, head of global operations. Some partners might retaliate, quiet blacklists. Closed doors. I'm not afraid of closed doors, Elliot said, smiling faintly. We're in the business of building our own doors now. He let the words hang there, challenging anyone to argue. No one did. He added, if you're uncomfortable, if you think this is too risky, I won't hold it against anyone who chooses to leave Novatech. No hard feelings. The room remained silent. Then Amelia set down her pen with a soft click. I didn't come here to play it safe, she said simply. One by one, others voiced their agreement. Not a single person left. That evening, Elliot stood at the large windows of his office again, watching the city pulse with life. He felt the weight of the decision, heavier than anything he had ever carried before. Tammy entered quietly, a thick folder tucked under her arm. You should see this, she said. Inside the folder were a dozen internal reports. One was from a Novatech engineer who'd experienced microaggressions from a supplier for over a year, but had never reported it, assuming nothing would happen. Another detailed a marketing partner whose diversity photo shoots didn't include a single black model until Elliot showed up at events. Reading each page was like peeling back layers of rot beneath polished floors. Elliot set the folder down carefully. He wasn't angry. He was resolved. Tomorrow, he said, we go public. Tammy's eyebrows lifted slightly. You sure? You said you didn't want this to be about headlines. It still isn't, Elliot said. But if we're going to tear the rotten foundations down, people need to see why. Across the city, at the Grand Lumina, panic was setting in. Their sales director stared at an email notification blinking on his screen. Subject: immediate termination of corporate partnership, Novatech Dynamics. No room for discussion. No threats, just a simple fact. They were losing one of their biggest accounts, and everything that would spiral out from it. In an emergency board meeting, the Lumina's leadership tried to brainstorm damage control. We can offer to sponsor diversity initiatives, one suggested. We could offer free bookings to minority-owned firms, another added. But they all knew it was hollow, because it wasn't about performative gestures anymore. It was about the story that was already writing itself, and they weren't the authors anymore. That night, as Elliot walked through the nearly deserted Novatech lobby, he thought back to a conversation with his father years ago, sitting on the battered porch of their old rental house. Son, his father had said, sipping cheap beer under the setting sun, the world will see your skin before it sees your spirit. Don't waste time begging for their vision. Build your own light. Elliot smiled at the memory. He wasn't waiting for recognition. He wasn't asking for permission. He was building something that no one could deny, even if they couldn't see it at first glance. Tomorrow would be louder. Tomorrow, Novatech would set a new standard, and the industry would either rise to meet it or be left behind. Either way, Elliot Brooks had already decided. He wasn't here to fit in. He was here to change everything. By the next morning, Elliot Brooks was trending, and not in the way he had ever planned. It started with a single post from an investor who had been at the summit. No rage. No clickbait. Just a simple caption above a photo of Elliot standing, calm and composed, outside the Grand Lumina's glass doors. Respect is not requested. It's expected. Remember who builds the rooms you want to be in. That post gathered thousands of shares within hours. Soon, mid-level managers, startup founders, software engineers, and venture capitalists alike were quietly retelling the story in their own way. No interviews, No hashtags, just a tide swelling beneath the surface. And the Grand Lumina. They weren't prepared. They issued a second public statement, a panicked, overly polished press release that only made things worse. Because by now everyone understood. This wasn't about bad service. It was about the rot that came from forgetting who you were dealing with until it was too late. At Novatech headquarters, Elliot gathered his executive team again. But this time, the tone was different. More alert, more charged. He stood at the head of the table holding a folder thick with papers. Behind him, a projection screen displayed the Novatech logo flanked by a single phrase in bold, "Accountability begins within." "We're not just auditing our partners anymore," Elliot said, voice steady. "We're auditing ourselves." A ripple of surprise through the room. Amelia leaned forward, hands steepled. "You mean internal?" Elliot nodded. "Every policy. Every practice, every department." "That's a massive undertaking," Samir said cautiously. "It'll cost millions." "It'll cost more not to," Elliot replied, eyes hard. Because what he saw now was bigger than one event, one hotel, or even one industry. It was about legacy, about whether Novatech would just talk about change, or actually build it. "And it starts with leadership," Elliot continued. He placed a thick file on the table. "My file." The room froze. Elliot nodded at Tammy, who tapped a few keys. Instantly, the screen behind him changed. It displayed his own performance evaluations, conflict of interest disclosures, and decision audits from the past 5 years. Transparent, raw, accountable. "If I'm going to ask this of every team here," Elliot said, "I have to ask it of myself first." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Amelia pushed her chair back and stood. She tapped the table lightly. "I'm in," she said. One by one, the rest followed. Samir. "Tammy, the others, no slogans. No grandstanding, just quiet commitment." After the meeting, as the boardroom emptied, Tammy lingered. "You're aware," she said carefully, "that doing this, real accountability, might expose things you won't like, might expose people you care about." Elliot nodded. "I'm counting on it." Tammy tilted her head, studying him. "You know, 5 years ago, none of us would have thought about doing this." "I know," Elliot said, half smiling. "We thought we were the good guys just because we weren't the worst guys." He looked out over the skyline. "But better than bad isn't good enough anymore." Later that afternoon, as the internal announcement about the audit went live, the ripple effect outside Novatech turned into a wave. Other companies began making sudden, suspiciously similar announcements. New diversity officers, revised codes of conduct, public commitments to change. But people weren't fooled. They saw which moves were reactionary and which were real. And Novatech? Novatech felt real. Inside the glass walls of Elliot's office, Jalen buzzed in. "You should see this," he said, holding up his phone. Elliot motioned him inside. Jalen placed the phone down and played a short clip. It was footage from an industry panel Elliot had spoken at a year ago, back when things were quieter. In the clip, a moderator asked Elliot, "What keeps you up at night, mister?" "Brooks? Competition? Market shifts?" Elliot's recorded answer played out clear and crisp. "I don't fear competition. I fear complacency. I fear building something that adapts to survive, but forgets why it was built to begin with." The video ended. Jalen looked up. "It's circulating again," he said, "but now, people are finally listening." Elliot leaned back in his chair, letting that sink in. He hadn't changed his tune overnight. He hadn't been radicalized by one slight, one insult. The seeds had been planted long before, It was just that now the world was finally catching up. Across town at the Grand Lumina, things were unraveling fast. Major clients canceled bookings. VIP suites stood empty. Revenue forecasts tanked. Internal emails leaked, exposing frantic, tone-deaf conversations among senior managers about how to spin the optics. Meanwhile, their competitors, the hotels that had welcomed Elliot's team without question, quietly picked up the business they lost. At Novatech, the audits began in earnest. Anonymous surveys, third-party evaluations, open-door forums for employees to air grievances without fear. Elliot sat in on every first meeting himself. No speech, no cameras. Just him, listening. Sometimes he scribbled furious notes. Other times he sat motionless, jaw tight. Because it wasn't easy hearing where they had failed, where they had looked the other way, where they had let harm go unspoken because it didn't reach the boardroom. And still, he stayed. At the end of a grueling session one evening, as the last employee filtered out, Elliot lingered in the empty room. The chairs were still warm from bodies, the air still buzzing with words that hurt to hear, but mattered. Tammy entered quietly, sliding a bottle of water across the table. "You don't have to be everywhere for every meeting," she said softly. "I do," Elliot replied, voice raw, "at least at the beginning." He turned toward the empty chairs. "Because the problem with building something big," he continued, "is sometimes you get so high up you forget what it feels like at the ground. And you can't fix what you don't feel." Tammy nodded. No arguments, no corporate buzzwords. Just a truth too big to ignore. As Elliot finally gathered his things to leave, he glanced once more at the empty room. He thought about his father's words again. Build your own light. He wasn't just building a company anymore. He was building a future. One where no one would have to explain why they belonged in the room to begin with. Katri. Elliot's name wasn't just circulating now, it was igniting something bigger. By Friday afternoon, news outlets caught up to the story. Not the sensationalized version they craved, but the quiet, powerful shift that had already changed the landscape. Billionaire CEO leaves hotel. After being disrespected, quietly relocates entire tech summit. No lawsuits, no public outcry, just power moving. The articles weren't loud, but they hit harder than any scandal could have. They portrayed Elliot as what he was, a man who did not need noise to change a room, a man whose presence redefined it. Back at Novatech, the energy was electric. Meetings ran later. Conversations dug deeper. Employees from departments that had barely interacted were now collaborating, realizing that real transformation required more than HR memos and casual Fridays. In the center of it all, Elliot moved like gravity. That afternoon, a private message landed in his inbox. Simple, unsigned. "Some of us have been waiting years for someone like you to make them feel seen." He stared at it longer than necessary before closing his laptop and heading downstairs. Tammy caught up with him in the lobby, holding a tablet filled with schedules and updates. "Quick briefing before you go?" she asked. Elliot shook his head. "Not this time. Something I need to handle first." He walked out into the crisp air of San Jose's financial district. The city buzzed with its usual rhythm, but Elliot had one destination in mind: the Grand Lumina Hotel. It wasn't about confrontation. He had no interest in shouting matches or public spectacles. It was about something cleaner. Closure. When he entered the lobby, the front desk clerk, the same woman who had dismissed him days ago, looked up. Their eyes met. Recognition flickered across her face, followed swiftly by fear, then awkward professionalism. "Good afternoon, sir," she said, voice tight. Elliot nodded slightly, not breaking stride. He didn't approach her. He didn't approach any of them. Instead, he walked straight to the main ballroom, where a small corporate event was underway. Tables with branded coffee cups. Idle small talk. Half-hearted networking. He stood at the entrance for a moment, unnoticed by most. It hit him how easily he could have disappeared into this scene too. Another black man assumed to be staff. Another success story overlooked because of old patterns no one bothered to question. But today, he wasn't disappearing. Today, he was choosing something else. As he turned to leave, he passed a young black employee pushing a cart of bottled waters toward the ballroom. The kid caught his eye, only for a second, but it was enough. A flash of wide-eyed recognition. A silent exchange. "You're not alone here." Elliot gave the slightest nod before heading back out into the bright afternoon. No confrontation necessary. His presence was statement enough. Later that evening, Novatech hosted a closed-door session for their team. Not about audits. Not about new initiatives. About story. Elliot stood at the front of the room in jeans and a black sweater, nothing to separate him from anyone else. "Everyone here has a story like mine," he said. "Not the billionaire part, the other part. The part where you walked into a room and felt it stiffen. The part where you earned every damn inch and still had to prove you deserved it." He paced slowly, letting the weight of the words settle. "I'm not here to be your hero. I'm here to remind you that you already survived the fire. Now it's time to build something that doesn't burn you every time you step inside." Hands went up. Stories poured out. One by one, employees shared moments they'd hidden for years. The time a client mistook a black project manager for the janitor. The Latina coder who had to use a fake name to get past recruiter filters. The Asian American designer whose ideas were praised only when repeated by someone else. Each confession was a thread. Each thread wove something new into the room. By the end, the air felt different. Charged. Elliot stood back and watched it unfold. This wasn't about him anymore. It was bigger. After the meeting, as people filed out, talking in clusters that didn't exist a month ago, Jalen approached him quietly. "You ever wonder," Jalen asked, "what would have happened if you had just waited outside like they wanted?" Elliot chuckled low under his breath. "Yeah. I would have missed all of this." The next morning, the Grand Lumina Hotel announced internal leadership changes. 2 senior managers quietly exited. A third issued a formal apology statement so stiff it could have been written by a machine. But it was too late. The investors who had witnessed the quiet exodus at the summit were already telling others about how respect, or the lack of it, spoke louder than branding, about how power moved differently now. And at Novatech, the shift deepened. Applications for open roles doubled overnight. Candidates cited the culture as the reason they wanted in. Clients extended contracts, citing integrity as the deciding factor. Elliot watched it happen with a mixture of pride and realism. Change was messy. Slow, incomplete, but it was happening. One decision at a time, one walkout at a time, one room reclaimed at a time. As he sat in his office watching the city glow beneath a pale sunrise, his phone buzzed. Another message. No name. Just words. "You didn't just change a hotel. You changed the blueprint." Elliot closed his eyes for a moment, breathing it in. Not victory, not vindication. Just another foundation stone laid. And the quiet, powerful certainty that this time, this era, they were building it themselves. The world didn't end with headlines. It shifted in places where headlines couldn't reach. 2 weeks after the incident, Elliot sat on stage at the West Coast Innovation Summit, the kind of conference that once barely acknowledged men like him unless they were framed as exceptions. Now he wasn't the exception. He was the standard. Rows of executives, founders, and investors leaned in as he spoke, not because he was the richest man in the room, but because he had become something else. Proof that strength wasn't loud. Proof that leadership didn't need permission. The real currency, Elliot said, is not who claps when you win, it's who stays when you take a stand. The room was silent, hanging on every word. He smiled faintly, thinking back to the day outside the Grand Lumina, to the valet who refused to meet his eyes, to the conference hall that emptied without a shout, just a shift. You don't demand respect, he continued. You build something so undeniable they have no choice but to see you. Applause broke out, real and unforced, echoing against the vaulted ceilings. After the session, a young woman approached him backstage. She wore a sharp navy blazer, her hands slightly trembling as she adjusted her conference badge. "Mr. Ellis," she said, voice low but steady, "I just wanted to say, I saw the story. What you did, it made me feel like maybe I don't have to shrink myself to fit in anymore." Elliot met her eyes, saw the fight there, saw the part of himself he had carried for years. "You never did," he said simply. She smiled, and it was the kind of smile that wasn't about admiration. It was about permission. Later that evening, Novatech's rooftop hosted a gathering for their team. No fancy banners, no media invites, just the people who had built this with him. Elliot stood by the railing, watching the skyline flicker into night. Tammy approached, handing him a glass of sparkling water. "You realize what you started, right?" she asked. He chuckled quietly. "I'm just doing what needed to be done." She shook her head, smiling. "You didn't just start something, you changed expectations." Across the rooftop, Elliot spotted Jalen deep in conversation with new interns, young, sharp, hungry kids who now believed they could aim higher because the blueprint had shifted, because someone had walked through the fire and hadn't flinched. "You ever think," Tammy said, "that maybe you were never supposed to just survive it? Maybe you were meant to rewrite it?" Elliot took a slow breath, feeling the weight and lightness of that truth. "I don't want to rewrite the rooms they built," he said, voice low. "I want to build new ones, better ones." She nodded. "You're already doing it." As the party wound down and the city hummed far below, Elliot stayed a little longer by the edge. He thought about his father's words, the ones that lived in his bones now. "Walk like you own the ground under your feet, even when they pretend not to see you." He hadn't just owned the ground, he had made them see it differently. As he turned to leave, a handful of employees called out to him, raising their glasses. "To building better rooms," one shouted. "To walking in like we belong," another added. Elliot smiled, not the practiced CEO smile, not the cautious one he had worn for years, but something unguarded, real. "To never asking for permission again," he said, lifting his own glass. The rooftop erupted in cheers, but it wasn't noise. It was promise. It was momentum. Walking away that night, Elliot didn't feel like he had conquered something. He felt like he had planted something, roots that would outlive him, foundations that would grow into spaces where the next generation wouldn't have to carry the same weight. And maybe, just maybe, one day they would walk into a room and be seen fully, immediately. Not because of what they wore or what they built, but because the walls themselves had changed. Not because they demanded it, but because they had built it. From scratch, on their own terms. If you ever find yourself standing in a place that doesn't see your worth, remember, you are not there to fit. You are there to decide whether the room deserves you, and if it doesn't, leave, build another. And this time, make it big enough for everyone who was ever made to feel small.